Ledbetter lessons.
Okay, so we're going to continue on with our Pong project. But now when you look at this block of code, or your code blocks, however you want to look at it, the script, you understand what everything is doing. You have mastered these blocks. So that's pretty cool. Now let's add our ball. So go to choose a sprite, and we can choose any kind of different ball. You got basketball, but since I'm kind of using the button theme, I'm going to use button for my ball. Okay, whoa, it's pretty big. That's a pretty big ball. So we don't want it that big. So how do we change the size? Well, again, in our attributes, we have a size box down here. So in there, I'm thinking that probably about 30% instead of 100% would be good. Yeah, so that's a good size for the ball that I chose, I think. So if you need to change the size, that's how you do it. Okay, so now let's get into coding our ball so it does something. So we've mastered the when clicked event. We know that's what's going to kick off our code. We want it to refresh and update every time that the screen refreshes, so we know that the forever loop is good for that. And now we want to move our block. So we're going to introduce a new block. This one here is called move 10 steps. So the change would change a value, right? But it would only do it in an X direction or a Y direction. This one here changes our value by whatever direction we're facing. So right now we're facing right. So if I click this, it moves to the right 10 steps. And you can see that it will add to this 32, 10 steps, right? And if I was pointing straight up, well, then it's going to add to my Y direction. So straight up is 0. And you'll see my Y will increase. So it'll go to 11, minus 11, I mean, to minus 1, and it continues up, right? But it also works at diagonals. So this is, well, we're going to get into trigonometry later, but this basically adds a little bit to the X and a little bit to the Y of this 10 steps. So we click that and you can see them both kind of change a little bit. So it's moving 10 steps from its original, so the distance is still the same. So I move like 10 steps from here to here. It's just the X amount that it moves and the Y amount that it moves is a little bit different. But we'll get into that in later tutorials. Right now, we're just going to use the move, and we know that it moves in the direction. So let's hit the go, and let's see what it does. So pretty cool. So over and over, it keeps adding 10 steps in this direction. Okay, so now we need it to bounce off the walls, right? We can't just have it sit in the corner. That's not a fun game. So we come down here and we see this if on edge bounce. So that's the block we want for it to bounce off the walls. And it's kind of like our if statement. So it's checking to see if we're on the edge, which we are at this time. So then it's going to bounce. Now I want you to look at this, okay? I'm pointing up in this direction, but when I click this block, you see that? If it's on the edge, it bounces. So the bounce changes its direction. And it'll bounce, so it detected that it touched the top, and now it's going to bounce out this way, and then it's going to bounce back out. So let's put that in there, and we'll let that run. Cool, so now it bounces off of all the walls, and we can see what it's doing when it bounces. So when it runs that little bounce function, it changes the direction. Cool. Okay, so now we got a bit of a game kind of going on, but you notice whenever it touches the paddles, it doesn't do anything. We need to program that. So we need to see if the ball is touching this paddle, then we need it to bounce, right? So if, well, let's bring in our if block, and then we need to sense to see if it's touching, so that's a sensing block. And there is this Boolean operator right here. If touching, and right now it's set to mouse pointer, well, we can do the drop down and we can do paddle 1. So now, the ball, since that's what the code is attached to, actually we should name this ball. That's good coding. Always name things so we understand. So if this ball, which is where the code's attached, is touching this paddle, then this will be true. So let's click this, and we see it's true because the ball is touching it. If we bring the ball out here, it's not touching the paddle. Click that block, and it returns false. So great. So if we're touching the paddle, then we want this code in here to execute. Okay, so now you might think, how do I bounce off of this? Well, you might have seen some different blocks. You might have seen this turn, right? So we maybe think, oh, if I turn 180 degrees, that might work. But when we think about it, say we're coming in at this angle here. And if you turn 180 degrees, it's basically facing the exact opposite way it came in. So that's how the ball is going to move if we did something like that. So we don't want that, right? It's going to come in and it's going to bounce out. That's not what we want. What we want is we want it to bounce out this way, right? Now, we also want it to bounce at the same angle. So if it comes in at a steeper angle, then we want it to bounce out at a steeper angle. If it comes in at a more wider angle, then we want it to bounce out at a wider angle. So how do we do that? Well, let's say that we have this facing negative 148. This is our angle coming in. Now, if we were to times that by negative 1, that would just change the value from a negative to a positive, right? So if I times that by negative 1, watch where the arrow goes. Like that, right? So that's kind of like what we want our green arrow to do. We want it to bounce in, bounce out. So that's how we're going to do it. Okay, so let's do that. So if we're touching the paddle, then, and this is another block that we're going to learn, this direction block down here, you see how they're circular? These are called variables. So if I were to check this block, you see the value shows up top here. So I checked the box over here, and we can see the value up here. And now you're going to notice that that value matches our direction over here, down here in this area. So that variable just holds that value. And it's called a variable because it changes. So I'm going to hit play, and we're going to see our ball. So as it moves, that value changes, but it equals the direction that we're facing all the time. So that's exactly what we want to use that. We want to multiply that by negative 1. So let's add another block, point. So we want to point in this direction. If I was to click this, it is going to change our pointing to pointing in the 90. See how I clicked that? It changed it to pointing to 90. Now, what we need to do is we need to multiply. So come down here to operators, go to the multiply block, which is what this one here looks like. I'll try to zoom in a little bit. Multiply has a little star. So we want to multiply our current direction by, and you can type in negative 1. Okay, so now when this block runs, it's going to point in the direction that we're facing. So right now this direction block, this variable, holds 90 in it, and it's going to times it by negative 1. So if I point in that direction, see how when I clicked it, it went to negative 90. Click it again, it times it by negative 1, it goes to positive 90. That's exactly what we want. So now, when we run this, let's see what happens. So see if we can get our, I'm going to show you how to fix that in a second too. So now, you see how that works? When it comes in, hits our paddle, it bounces off of it. That's great. Now, you notice that whenever I was using my paddle and I ran over this, we kind of got the ball stuck in there. So we don't want that. We want to fix that little sticking area. So in order to do that, just a simple little hack for now is we'll move the ball out to where it's on the outside of the paddle, not touching it, and we'll see what our X value is. So it's basically negative 198 for me. Okay, so if you look here, I'll just highlight that so that we know the value that we're working with. Okay, so there's another block that we're going to use then for that. So it's called a set block. So this just sets X to whatever value we put in here. So it doesn't change it, but it actually sets the value to. So I put a 0 in here, right? Watch what happens when I click the block. It will automatically set that right to 0. So I click the block, and now the value is set to 0. So we wanted minus 198. Okay, so now when I click that, it sets X to 198. So we're going to point in that direction, but if we're inside of the ball, we're just going to set the the X to 198. So it doesn't matter where it hits, it's always just going to come out here and be on the outside, which is exactly what we want. So let's just try this again. Let's try to trap my ball this time. And it's a lot. Oh, I'm not very good at the game yet. Yeah, so you see that you can't really get it stuck anymore. Okay, so that worked out really well. Okay, so now we got this paddle working. It's bouncing well. Now we need to do the same thing for our paddle 2. So again, to speed things up, we can duplicate this whole if block here, and we'll put it below the other one. So now what we want to do is we just need to change a couple things. So if we're touching paddle 2, then we're going to point in the opposite direction of whatever we come in at. And we are going to set our X to a different value, because on this side, if we set it to minus 198, it's going to, as soon as it hits our paddle, it's going to bounce way over to this side. Actually, I'll show you that real quick. So it goes in, touches it, see how it automatically jumps it way over here. But what we want is we want it to be about on this side, right? So what's nice is that if we have this mirrored, I mean, it is mirrored from the center, so we can make the value a mirrored value. So that means instead of minus 198, we'll just put in 198. So it'll be on this side here. Now with our paddles too, we can also mirror where they show up. So let's put an even value here, minus 240, and that places the paddle 1 at minus 240 on the X, and then paddle 2, we can put 240 on its X. So now they are both the exact same distance from the center, so the game is fair. And when we put our ball to 198, it looks like it's just about the exact position that we want. Okay, so now let's change our angle a little bit. I think something like that looks great. Let's hit run, and let's see how it works. So it bounces really well off the paddle. Let's see if it bounces off our second paddle here. And it does. It works great. Okay, so that is our second part. We have a ball bouncing around. We have the paddles moving. Really, all we have to do now is add a score, maybe some sound, and a couple other little things. But for the next couple videos, we're going to go through the blocks so that you master the ones that we've just learned. So I'll see you in the next videos.